Hey, superachievers! This episode is part of a very special series I have curated for you. Your level of emotional intelligence is one of the most significant contributors to your success in life, however you choose to define success for you. In my emotional intelligence workshops, I use the EQI 2.0 model to help professionals and leaders assess how they are doing in self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making, and stress management, the main areas of the model. The model contains 15 competencies grouped into each of the areas I just mentioned. You can learn more about the model at mhs.com. So what is so special about this series? Each episode is a deep dive into a competency from the model with an expert who provides you with strategies for improving your emotional intelligence. In this episode, Rita Murray tells us about effectively utilizing our emotions in the decision-making process. An educational psychologist and certified speaking professional, Rita is passionate about helping bright, talented, and motivated individuals harness their source of strength to achieve their goals and dreams, particularly in business. She does this through her company, Performance Consulting. Welcome, Rita. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. It's really great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited that you're here to talk about decision making. But before we get into that, can you share a little bit about your background with our listeners?
Happy to. I have been involved with the whole domain, if you will, of psychological type of people, of what drives us, what inspires us, what giftings we have. And it led to years later, having done a lot of work with the Myers-Briggs, for those of you who know what the MBTI is, then to study the EQ, the emotional intelligence tool by MHS, which I really love, having looked at a lot of them. I did a lot of my dissertation research around type and emotional management. And so I have just a sincere belief that we can all transform ourselves every day more emotionally to be better human people, to be better connectors, to be better contributors to our world and our situation. So I'm in it every day. I'm steeped in it. My husband would tell you I can't. I eat, breathe, drink, sleep, EQ, and he's right.
Yeah. Me too. I love it's almost like layers of an onion with personality and then EQ and all that other stuff for us humans.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it.
So now our focus for today, which I'm very excited about, is a very important part of emotional intelligence. And a lot of people don't realize that emotions have such a huge impact on our decision making. So let's talk about the decision-making composite, if I'm saying it right, of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
First of all, what is it? Why is it a part of emotional intelligence?
That angle is really what I think sets the MHS tool apart, this EQI, because it does begin to really focus in on what typically is a very objective set of words. You think of decision-making, problem-solving, reality testing, impulse control. They all beg to be misunderstood in the domain, if you will, of emotional intelligence. But it's really important as we put these together that I think it helps explain why often it's really difficult for people who are pretty hardwired to today's business to be objective, to understand that in the domain of emotional management, you can get hijacked real quickly by your emotions. And if you don't know what to do, you can feel so naive, so juvenile, so unable to connect the dots and understand that just managing your emotions helps your decision making.
Oh, huge, right? So let's first look at someone using emotional intelligence successfully in decision making. What does that look like?
So if we break out the three pieces of it and look first at just problem solving, generally, if you think about it, every day, just you, Chris, think how many problems do you solve in an average day, right?
Lot per hour.
Right. So take that times 365, and we know that problem solving is huge.
Yeah.
And yet, what we don't realize is we do have tools at our disposal that can alert us to when emotions are involved in the problem solving. Now, sometimes some problems are pretty objective, and we can just use all the tools of objectivity to analyze them, pro, con, what if.
Yeah.
However, when our emotions start to play in, like we notice we're getting really mad or frustrated, or we haven't finished and it's late at night, now we're tired, we know that emotions impact us. However, it's data that we may choose to just ignore and not realize it's a part of who we are. And it's often born of tendencies that are long overlooked for some who are into their 20s, 30s, 40s, and older. This idea that if you pay attention to it, there is a high cost to delay and not paying attention. And in the case of problem solving, what we know from the research, Chris, I think this is fascinating, is that when in problem solving, you can manage, and emotions are involved, you can manage to remain kind of cool and calm, you're most innovative.
Yeah.
Because you're excited, you can do this, you can handle it. And then when you know that you've got a short time frame, your emotions are involved, you're getting angry, but you have to get it done. Sometimes even the bad moods or the emotions that aren't so great push us to closure, can get it done.
Yeah.
So there are really interesting things to just problem solving that to me are fascinating around coming up with a tool for a way to diagnose our own emotions during that process of problem solving.
Yeah. Well, so then how do we make sure that we are emotionally intelligent in our decision making? What are maybe some strategies?
So I think coming up with a model, right? I know that in psychological type, even we use what's called the Z problem solving model, right? Where you really look at the facts. So you evaluate it, then you coolly and calmly begin to brainstorm. Then you think about alternatives, possibilities. Then you move to analytics. And now we're using that objectivity to decide. Having done that, though, we have to consider relationships and our own emotions and perhaps the emotions of others as we begin to do that, tease that out. It doesn't have to take long. But people begin to identify and know what our problem-solving go-to method is. And so to be able to unpack it ourselves and think of ways to evaluate, is our problem-solving approach working when emotions are at stake?
Yeah.
And so for some, it's a model. For others, it's ask for feedback.
Yeah.
In the middle of that problem we were trying to solve, did I get out of hand? Those are, kind of ways that can help us help ourselves. That's what really a lot of this EQ is managing ourselves, right?
Yeah. Huge, right? Awareness of and then managing of.
Yes.
So I love that you brought up, because I was thinking of thinkers and feelers when you were talking, right? The theory Z. Okay, so let's look at it maybe from the thinker's point of view, someone who is, based in logic and they want to weigh and analyze and stuff. How can they use emotions more effectively when they're making decisions? When it's really hard for them to understand, right, others' emotions, essentially.
Right. So for thinking deciders, those who are wired, I say it's the gift of psychologically distancing yourself, making everything more objective. And therefore, caring has nothing to do with it. So when you're using that, when it's engaged, it doesn't care. Logic doesn't care. So just knowing that about yourself means that in order to engage your emotions and become aware of others, you've got to care.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think EQ is so hard for some. And the way, to me, you help thinking deciders is helping them that it's just managing the data they're given about their emotions. And it doesn't have to be a touchy-feely exercise. It doesn't have to feel awkward, insincere, socially weird. It's just a matter of saying, okay, my emotions are data that life is giving me that physiologically I can feel. So why don't I pay more attention? Because logic often says you got to do it right. There's got to be a certain reality to it. And for thinking deciders, they are really good often at the part of that composite part of decision making, which is reality testing. They feel really good at that because that's looking at things as they are. But often, again, our emotions play into that. There's a lot more to the context of what's happening. So I think for thinking deciders, it's realizing at times how to access your own emotions simply as data. If people would just spend time doing it, they would learn. And the hardest thing is like letting down your own sense of competence, of logic, and saying, let's stop myself and let me feel how this feels or how someone else might feel about it. It's data. It's objective data. So I think that can help.
Oh, I like that. And I like seeing other people's feelings as data as well.
Right.
Because I've helped, well, I'm a thinker feeler, right? Nice little balance there, hope in this area at least. But I've noticed some people who are thinking tend to maybe dismiss others' emotions. Any suggestions for them to maybe see that a little better?
So two things. I always like to say this isn't either or, right? It's the order. It's like, where do you go first?
Yes.
Clarity, thinking deciders; harmony, feeling deciders. So in emotional intelligence, and I think this is why some people, coaches I work with a lot, that just give up. They just say, my clients, they're not about getting into this. And I said, but they will if you make it objective. They really will. And so helping tune the conversation to the objectivity of managing your emotions, to emotional transformation, can equate to improvement in morale, lower absenteeism, just a better sense of teamwork. If people understand, you're just raising the bar a bit. However, we know from the research that it's really hard to convince someone who's wired and often doesn't I like sort of the visual, if you will, that when logic is on, caring is off. So to care, you have to turn it on, right? And you just have to, again, engage your brain, your cognitive brain around, okay, I just need to listen more carefully, all the different tools of EQ that help you focus in on the heart, on what you feel, and not feel awkward about it. I think the competence issue is what stops a lot of thinking deciders. They think this is just too hard. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to be assertive. I only know how to be aggressive, for example, because that works for me. But we know today in this world, you have a need to be attentive to your own emotions and learn then how to at least examine the data before you. And then get some feedback. And the beauty, as you know, of EQ is there are a lot of other elements of it that can be used to foster the thinking, deciding, whether it's paying attention to relationships, your own self-regard. They're all windows to it.
Yeah. So I love about the model.
Challenge is making time and taking it seriously that this data matters, and it can be costly and it will derail you, especially in today's world with all of the drama, the sensation, the constant conflict, the voices for unity, and yet the constant disunity. And so it's at an all-time high, sort of the value now, to me, of developing your emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree. To be successful more than ever in today's work environment and home environment. Yes. Emotional intelligence is a necessity. I think more and more people are seeing that too.
Yes, I agree.
All right, let's go over to the other spectrum. Maybe those that are more feeling deciders. How can they be more emotionally intelligent in their decision-making ability?
Yeah, I love that. I'm guilty. I am harmony first. And I see through the lens. So type allowed me to own it and say, okay, this is where the wind blows in my life. I tend to go there first. If someone were evaluating me, they'd say she's pretty good at it, socially connected, natural, tactful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the downside of it is, however, it can be a derailer when it comes to decision-making because it means you won't always speak up and out.
Yeah.
Or when you do, it's over the top. So it's drama. And the greatest sign of people who have a low sense, if you will, of reality testing or even problem solving is that it just becomes too emotionally verbal and hard to tease out the objectivity. And yet, again, we know that the value of harmony and for feeling deciders is that they naturally, the goal is to collaborate, to avoid conflict. So pressing in is really important because feeling deciders need to understand that all the other elements, like finding your voice through being more assertive or just having a good sense of self-regard, you can use your interpersonal relationships, you can use a lot of things, but often when it comes to problem solving and reality testing, it truly is about standing on your own 2 feet, having an opinion, voicing it, solving the problem, and realizing that thinking deciders don't often get upset when truth is spoken or you try to stand toe to toe. And feeling deciders can do that, can learn to do that well, to not be conflict avoidant. I think is the biggest part of it. It's that courage. And I think that's why people like so much of the Brené Brown work today. It's no shame, having courage, speaking into it. So much of that message to me is to feeling deciders.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and I love how with the model that you can work on other areas like assertiveness and self-regard to improve yourself in this area.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, also along those lines, we have people who are really emotionally intelligent when it comes to decision making. But as we know, every strength can become a weakness if we overuse it. Yeah. So what are your suggestions for overusing if someone is overusing their strength in decision making in regards to emotions?
So the beauty of this is, and I love that, there's a quote, unguarded strength is a double weakness, right? And that double weakness. So I think the best way is at getting an advocate, someone who you really trust, that you will ask for feedback when you are in the middle of problem solving or you are being totally objective. There is no sense of harmony, personalization in anything you're saying or doing. And it just feels like you're just way out on the edge of just trying to get this done and over with. And casualties don't matter. And so having someone be your guard that you trust to give you that kind of feedback that's in the moment, that's honest. By in the moment, I mean after a meeting or even asking them for pre-preparation. You know me. So a big part of it is know your style, know your problem solving go-to, know your reality testing if you tend to be just way too objective or way too dramatic. But know that and then be very deliberate and intentional about getting that feedback. And in a lot of my coaching sessions, most of my clients are thinking deciders. And a lot of it is me helping them understand, first of all, this is data about you that you're giving the world. And some of it's costing you a lot. And no one's telling you that. Because often the very people that will be able to give you that, the harmonizers, for example, feel put off because you don't ask. So being curious, I think, is another big one, Chris. Like, just be curious. How did I come across? And be willing to change. Be open to trying it out different. It's like baby steps, right? And I think that's what's so awkward for thinking deciders who are always sharpening their tools of logic, which is so objective. To be good at this, you have to feel it physiologically, experience it, and articulate it. Those I statements that thinking deciders typically resist. I feel, well, I don't care what you feel.
I relate.
So lean in to the discomfort of realizing that when you can articulate what's at stake, if we don't work through this for you and for the other person, it feels painful because that handwriting exercise we do in the Myers-Briggs, and you write with your preferred hand and then you switch hands and you write with your non-preferred. It's like that. It's like when you're looking at too much or too little on any of these EQ scales. The beauty, as we know, of too little is there's lots of ways to help people get more, but when you have too much, when it's overdone, it's really hard to dial it back by focusing on what it is you're doing too much of. So this is why, in this case, with decision-making, problem-solving, reality testing, by asking someone, then you're involving interpersonal relationships. Perhaps you're even empathizing with how they see it. Lots of great ways to look at these words as objective words, as a model, as tools, and then get feedback through an emotional connection with someone else. is
Yeah.
gold.
Yes, I love it because relationships are important, right? To being successful. And that's part of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would love to hear a little more about your products and services for our listeners.
Well, I do a lot of work with the Myers-Briggs. So on my website, I have a store and I have a book on type that I love that I put together after, I can't believe I'm saying this, over 30 years of doing work with type. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and I work with Hyle Rutledge, who is really an expert in so many of these things. And Hyle and I have spent the last few years working on generations materials. Now, I developed back in 2000, I did about 3 books at the time through that. And Hyle and I joined forces a few years ago to continue to update this along the lines of emotional intelligence and generations. And I just love that, Chris, the whole idea, especially impulse control, which we didn't address, which is a big part. And that's a big part of having this and iPhones and iPads, is this whole world is constantly drawing us in, and being able to maintain distance and stop and just regard ourselves as having the ability to manage our impulses, I think is important. So generations play a lot into that.
Oh, yeah. So for people to find out more about your products and services, ritamurray.com?
It's actually Performance OK, and that's Oklahoma. Performance OK. Thank you for asking. I do have a Rita Murray speaking website, but the Performance OK is the tools website.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I do the MH. That's where I offer the EQ and the MBTI and the generations work, as well as mentoring. I do a lot of mentoring, corporate mentoring workshops. I love that. And all of those use these tools.
Awesome.
That help people. Yeah, thank you.
We'll make sure that gets in the episode description. And we will have Hyle on as well to talk about a few of the EQI subskills. Yeah.
Excellent.
So what is your final piece of advice for our listeners in regards to decision making?
Just give yourself a break. Understand that we're all a work in progress. This takes time. Everyone does it different. There's no gold. There's no Olympic gold for emotional intelligence. There's no standard like IQ. So you can't keep like being best. You just need to be your best self. And that means paying attention to it. Most importantly, ask others, be curious. Edgar Schein's humble inquiry always comes to mind. You know, this ability to stop and ask others, how do you see me? And be willing to receive their feedback. Yes. Often the defenses come up and it doesn't help anything. So how do we continue to want to build a bridge to our own self-understanding? You know, I believe we're all created so differently by God for gifts to one another. And so when we learn to not just tolerate one another, but to appreciate one another, to me, that's the goal.
Oh, I love it. Oh, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
To learn more about Rita, visit her website at performanceok.com or ritamurray.com.